Welcome to the Texas Conflict Coach radio program. If you've ever experienced or engaged in destructive or unresolved conflict, then you know it leads to broken relationships, distrust, and damaging results. Our program will help you manage and resolve conflict effectively with strategies, valuable resources, and support. Since 2009, our radio program hosted guest experts from around the globe sharing their perspectives, experiences, and expertise while giving you food for thought. If you can't listen live, then download and listen to any of our 300-plus podcasts in our library at texasconflictcoach.com. So sit back, relax, or join the conversation every Tuesday evening, or tweet us at TXConflictCoach.
Hi, this is Zena Zumeta, your guest host. Our program today is Stop the Dreaded Drama and End Destructive Conflict. We've all experienced the drama when we engage in destructive and dysfunctional conflict. It's draining, damaging, and downright unhealthy. So the originator of this blog, Pattie Porter, is with me to discuss her new mini-book, Stop the Dreaded Drama, 55 Tips for Ending Destructive Conflict, which I have read and love, and highlights strategies to withdraw from the drama, reevaluate the situation, and reenter the conflict from a healthier and constructive approach, and with practical tips for dealing with any conflict. Pattie Porter is a licensed clinical social worker and holds the Advanced Practitioner Workplace Mediator designation from the Association of Conflict Resolution, the Credentialed Distinguished Mediator from the Texas Mediator Credentialing Association, and the Synergy Certified Advanced Conflict Coach and Coach Mentor, was recognized by the International Coach Federation. Pattie trains extensively throughout the U.S. on topics related to dispute resolution, and she is the 2014 president-elect of the Texas Association of Mediators. Tonight we're not taking live callers, but Pattie will be on the chat room if you have questions, and we'll also be doing a live Twitter chat using the hashtag #TCC Radio. So, Pattie, welcome to your own program.
It feels a little strange being on the other end of the hosting, so I'm very honored. And it's so funny because you were the first host to interview me on my own show, 3 or 4 years ago now. And so here we come back and return again, and I'm so honored.
And it's, again, such a pleasure to have you. So, I've known you for all these years, and I've really admired your approach to conflict resolution. And now you've written a mini-book on the topic, and as I said, I love it. So can you talk a little bit about how you decided to write it and what you wanted us readers to get from it?
Well, yes, I'm going to definitely address that. And just a little tip and a little information for the listener. We are going to offer a special pricing discount for those listeners who listen to this episode, so just kind of tune in toward the end of the show, and we'll give you all the details about that. So, yes, I decided to write this. Writing has not necessarily been like the thing I jumped to say, hurrah, I love writing. And so I decided, I need to do more writing. And so I hired a coach, my own coach, right? I hired a business writing coach, and Tyrone Holmes out of Arizona, and he has been working with me for quite some time and just helping me with that. And so I decided, in working with him, I said, my whole goal with this whole Blog Talk Radio is how do I educate the public about conflict management, conflict resolution, how not to be afraid of it. And so what I really wanted readers to get from this particular book is how do you stop the cycle of unhealthy and destructive conflict that we find ourselves in? Because we don't know what to do with it, and so and sometimes that means avoiding the conflict, and yet that contributes to that cycle of unhealthy and destructive conflict. And the second that I wanted to get, for readers to get from the mini book was you don't have to be fearful and avoid at all costs. There are strategies that you can employ right now to end the drama. And so how do we manage that anxiety and fear and not just constantly avoid the situation or go to the opposite extreme, which a lot of us do. But it's about not being afraid and managing that fear and also, stopping getting out of that cycle, of that destructive conflict. So.
And I love the way you describe it as drama, because I think a lot of us really experience it that way. And also the fear and the anxiety. So we don't like the drama, but the fear and the anxiety keep us in it, which is kind of strange.
Well, it is, and it's the irony, because we hate it so much, and yet we do things that contribute to the very thing that we don't want to be involved in. And, it's funny about the title, because, we went through many renditions of the title, and I finally said, you know what, this is to go out to not experts who do this work like us, but the everyday person that's listening to the program who doesn't do this work all the time. And so I was in a car trip with a whole bunch of folks, friends and family and things like that. And we were in this on this trip, and I said, when you think of conflict, and I gave some examples of their workplaces because they were already sharing some things. And I said, so what comes to mind when you think of those conflicts in your work or wherever they were describing it? So tell me the words that are coming to mind. They're like, drama. It's always about drama. And I was just like, oh, that's a great word. So that's kind of how that really came about, was how do we stop this dreaded drama?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a great description of it, because we all feel like it's somebody else's drama, and then all of a sudden we're in it. And what do we do?
I know. And what do we do indeed? Yes.
So you described how you wanted to help people step back from the drama. So I think we're in it, and then all of a sudden we're thinking, how do we get out of this? So would you be willing to talk about one of your tips for doing that?
Absolutely. And, one of the biggest things when we find ourselves in this what feels like an uncontrollable situation, or things are just spiraling out of control, and I guess the first thing I would say is take a helicopter view. In other words, imagine, when we're in the midst of the conflict and we're in the muck of it all, like we're, drowning in, the mud or, quicksand, we're surrounded by all the muck and we can't get clear about the entire picture. And so one of the tips is take a helicopter view. And that's really about taking a step back from the conflict. And when I say take a helicopter view, it's like literally, how do you imagine yourself in a helicopter and you fly above the whole situation and you look down on it and say, oh, I didn't see that. I didn't see that there was a big building right there, or that there was a detour, or that there's a whole element, that we didn't even know was involved. And so when you're taking that helicopter view, you're looking at what are the other contributors, and that doesn't necessarily mean just people. It could be that, that there's a cultural issue, let's say in the workplace, or maybe there's some type of a different value system that's really clashing, or maybe we come from very different, religious and cultural backgrounds that clash, or there's maybe limited, there's so many different things that we don't look at because we're so focused at looking at the person right in front of us that we want to blame them, and we get into that drama. So take a helicopter view.
And I particularly like that because, my image of the muck is that there's a crocodile in there somewhere. And that the helicopter allows you to see, is there one, and is the head above water, or, could I step forward, as well as, what are the differences and what are things that I haven't seen. I think that's really a great idea. Plus, it really takes the emotion out of it, doesn't it, to think of yourself in a helicopter.
I mean, you would hope so, because if you just literally take a step back and then get into that helicopter, maybe is there another analogy that resonates with you as well besides the helicopter?
Well, I know that Yuri talks about stepping to the balcony. So I think it is, that idea of looking from kind of back and above really makes a difference. It's what gets us out of that emotion. So I like that.
I mean, and literally taking a step back, meaning not engaging with that other person or that, I mean, literally, it could be, the stepping back could be a 24-hour truce. It could be, you know, hey, I need to go walk down the river and go to the lake, and I need to reflect on it. So it's a variety of those types of things of taking that step back so you can get a bigger picture.
Right. Well, you know, I know another thing that you've emphasized is preparation as a way to step back from the drama, and especially if you're trying to re-engage with that person that you're having a hard time with. So what do you think of as good preparation tips?
Well, there's a number of things, and in the Minibuk I talk about, you know, some of our own internal preparation, and really it's about self-reflection about what's really going on here for me in the conflict. And then there's other preparation tips that I talk about. Okay, you made this decision to go into the conversation, so I'll talk about those prep tips a little bit later. But some of the you know, once you take that step back and you're trying to understand the bigger picture, one of the biggest, I think, self-reflection prep tools, if you will, is a tip that I call check your assumptions. And this is a really big one because we tend, when we're triggered by something someone does or says, right, it triggers our hot button. And we tend to make a false assumption about their motivation. In other words, my assumption about someone who did something I didn't like, I might immediately in my head say to myself, well, what a jerk. He's just trying to be mean. He's trying, you know, so we imply, right, this very negative intention about this person, and that might be farthest from the truth, but that's the assumption that we make, and the more protracted the conflict, the worse the assumption we make about that person.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good point about assumptions. And I know there was recently on Facebook this little quote that maybe the person is just really crazy and not evil, not mean. But even that, you know, just, you're right. We make our assumptions and we go forward with them, and we can be totally wrong.
Well, and part of looking at that, you know, when you really stop to think about it is, you know, ask yourself the question, when you're taking the step back and you're doing some prep work, you're really reflecting, you know, what are the other possibilities for why this person acted the way they did? What do you think they intended to do in that exact situation? What were they trying to do? So really getting yourself to think about what was really going on in their own intention. Where you probably know that person well enough to know they really weren't trying to hurt me. Now, it could be that you find a situation and say, yeah, they were really trying to hurt me. Okay, but at least you checked those assumptions. So, and that's hard for people to do.
Why were they trying to hurt me? What was going on with that? What's in the dynamic that they would want to do that?
That's right. You go to the next level of questioning. So, yes, absolutely, absolutely.
And I think you're right about that, too, because I think if I look at somebody and I try to think, why would they be doing what they're doing? You know, what is the reason behind it? It makes me think very differently about them.
Exactly. And that's what you're trying to do when you're in any conflict situation is you're really trying to shift your own, you know, your own thinking really about the situation, because as long as we stay stuck in those false assumptions or those wrong assumptions in our thinking about that situation, about that other person, we're going to find ourselves stuck. We're going to find ourselves blaming. We're going to find ourselves trying to shame the other person, and it's going to be very, very difficult to really look for basically standing in their shoes and being, you know, standing from their perspective. And so that's a really hard one to really look at. But if you really try to look at those types of questions, I think that's going to help you a lot.
Right, and to even think, what are some other reasons that they might be doing it besides the one that I'm thinking of?
Exactly, you know, and the other thing, too, is just, now, so here's another way of looking at it. Let's say that they're equally in conflict with you. Just because you might be in conflict with them doesn't necessarily mean, but let's say that they're triggered by something you said or did.
Yep.
So the question then becomes, what do you think they were assuming about you? And not just, yeah. So what do you think they were assuming about you? Well, they thought I was being, better than them, or they thought I was, ignoring them, or, well, what was your own intention? Well, my intention was, so see, your own intentions, they're pure, but when it comes to somebody else, they're not so pure.
Right.
So you can also look at it from the other person's perspective by saying, what do you think they're making assumptions about you?
Yeah, and that's a really good point. Well, this is a good time for me to remind everyone that you are listening to the Texas Conflict Coach Blog Talk Radio program, and we are talking with Pattie Porter about her book, Stop the Dreaded Drama and End Destructive Conflict. So, Pattie, once you're in the conversation, what tips do you have for actually holding the discussion?
Well, there's a lot of them, and I was like, okay, which one do I want to select here? And I think the one I want to select here, because really, being in conflict, especially when you're in the destructive cycle yourself, even though you think you're not contributing, you probably are. So the tip I would give is identify the troubling behavior. And I don't mean the troubling behavior of the other person. I mean identify your troubling behavior. And so what does that mean? So ask yourself this question. What might you say or do that might trigger the other person when you're in this conversation? So if you know that you're preparing to hold a discussion, right, and you're preparing for that, what do you think, knowing this person as you do in this conflict, you might not have known them for years, but you know them well enough that you've been in conflict with them, what do you know about yourself in that interaction with that person that you know that every time you raise your eyebrow or you take a huff or you cross your arms or maybe you have a particular phrase that you use and you know that every time you do that or say that you get a reaction? So if you're doing that out of manipulation, stop. So you need to identify and really think about what are you doing to contribute. Your contribution could be that you're not responding back to their question, that you're shutting down, that you're putting your head down. If you know that that's going to escalate the situation and the conversation, recognize that and try your best not to do that. So really be thinking, what is the troubling behavior that might trigger and escalate the conversation when you get into it?
And, the scary thing is, I think you're right that we do know what we do that makes it worse. And yet, a lot of times we just continue to do that, whether out of self-righteousness or whatever. But we also know what to do to make it better by either stopping that or things that have helped in the past.
Well, exactly. And, and it's again about being respectful because, you could say, the person listening to the show right now could say, well, I know that sometimes I take a deep breath like that, and I can't control the fact that they get upset with me. That's just who I am. That's just how I release my anxiety. Well, if you know that triggers them, try your best to understand. You can't control their reaction to that, but understand, is that something you want to try to avoid or reduce, especially if you're wanting to have a conversation that is going to be constructive. So it's just, again, about being aware of yours. But the other thing is, if you really want to think about the next step, which is, what might they say or do that every time they do it, it just sends you to the moon, and everything's going to go. Yeah, so what is it that they say or do that you want to be best prepared for? So do they always use a phrase? Maybe it's sarcasm. Maybe they, slap their hand on the desk. Maybe they use name calling. What is it that really bugs you the most that you want to best be prepared for? So when it happens, because you can't control the person, you want to have a different response so that you don't get triggered in the same way that you do in that conversation. So you want a different response that's going to be calming, that's going to ignore it, that's not going to trigger it, and just take some deep breaths and say, I'm not going to respond to that, or if I respond to it, I'm going to respond in a different constructive way. So that would be the two-sided coin.
Yeah, because when you say that, I was thinking there are some people that I'll go into a conversation thinking, if they say that, I'm leaving, I'm done. And what you're saying is no, that I should think about if they say that, how can I respond differently?
Exactly, because it's your trigger, and I I used to say this in training all the time. I still do every so once in a while, in that your trigger is your trigger, you installed it. So
that's great.
You installed your own trigger button. It could have come back when you were a kid, but the thing is that your trigger button is you. You installed it, so regardless of whether they pressed it or not, you have to be the one to control how you can either choose to react, which is what you just described, right? If they do this, I'm leaving. Or you can be the bigger person and say, you know what, I'm going to respond in a different way. And maybe the response is no response. You just ignore what they say and you continue the conversation.
Well, Pattie, what do you suggest for people who think, I'm just not ready for this. I'm not confident about doing it. I'm not sure that I can really control my triggers. What suggestions do you have for them?
Well, it's interesting because I've had a lot of feedback on the Minibuk since it's come out in early April, and I had a woman business owner who was sharing with me. She says, I'm like a bull in a china shop. Remember those commercials? I can't remember what the commercial brand was, but the bull in the china shop, right? And and she says, I know that about myself. And she's a woman business owner, and she says, I read this book, and there's great content. She goes, but Pattie, I don't know that I could implement these things. And I said, well, tell me more about that. She says, because I know myself. She didn't feel confident in herself that she would be able to respond or to make choices that would not continue to keep her in the drama or to escalate it. And she goes, I know that in certain situations in her business, and it's a family-owned business, she says, I would need somebody else to come in and do that. And I think, with your question, it's really about when people say that, one, there's a real strong fear or anxiety about either their ability to handle it differently or they're a fear that it's going to somehow ruin the relationship or cause some damage or that they're going to be incapable. And she goes, Pattie, I really need to take a training on really how to do this and then use the book as a resource. So we talked a lot about, getting those skill sets, building that confidence, building the competence in dealing with especially complex disputes. And I think what she was reading toward the end of the book, which is, how do you facilitate your own conversation, I think that was very scary for her. And so in the book it talks about, if that's the case, obviously you can get skills building. You can, certainly educate yourself, but that's where mediators like yourself, right, like myself, they're mediators that specialize in all kinds of areas of disputes, whether it's family or workplace or family business. There's coaches like myself, yourself, that help one-on-one with individuals to build that competency and that confidence. So absolutely there are resources to help you build that, or certainly, like the tips book, to give you some very specific strategies to address any area, depending on where you are in the conflict.
Well, and I think you're right that there are some things, as I read through the book, I realize there are some things that I could just do, that I'm willing to try this. But then there are other things, no, I really am not ready, and I would need some help. So I think you're exactly right with that.
Well, and that was the whole purpose of this book is, another business owner who read the book, she's got it right next to her dictionary on top of her desk because so many of these tips can be implemented immediately, like right now. You hang up the phone, you're like, I'm going to try this one. It doesn't have to be done in sequential order or anything. Certainly if you wanted to go in sequential order, you can, but any one of these tips can be taken and utilized right away on any element of the conflict. And so, they're very, for the most part, easily implemented. So.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, if people wanted to take a first step or the next step in this, what would you suggest?
As far as, you mean, say more about that. I'm sorry.
Well, so
when you say a next step to.
Yeah. So, I mean, excuse me. You generally talk about, a call to action or an assignment. Like if somebody said, okay, I'm ready now to start doing something, what would you suggest?
Well, so I was thinking about what tip in here could I really get people to start thinking about. And the one that I wanted to focus on is about letting go of baggage. All right? So I wanted to just kind of give a visual metaphor if I can. Do we have a little bit of time to do that?
We do.
Okay, so I want you to imagine, I actually did this exercise with a team that was having a lot of problems, and they were holding on to a lot of old baggage. There was a lot of changes going on in their organization. A lot of people were holding on to resentment and anger, and they couldn't forgive people, and they didn't like the fact that all this change was happening, and maybe it changed, their role, their position. And so what I did is I brought in a lot of suitcases, all kinds of size suitcases, and I spread them out all through the training room. And I didn't say what they were, so people were having to walk. I mean, they were everywhere, so people were having to walk around them like, what the heck is all these suitcases? and part of it is when we have a lot of baggage, we're tripping on them. We're we're like, okay, they're getting in our way. We can't be effective. Right. And so once we started the exercise, I said, I want you to really think about what this baggage is that you're carrying. And I said, I want you to think about what would you label this baggage? Is it a thought, a resentment, an anger, an emotion? Is it a firmly held belief about, something that's important to you that's part of that baggage? And what's keeping you from letting that go. And so I had them put all these, really think about it, and they put it on Post-it notes, and then I had them tape it onto the baggages all over, right?
Oh,
and I said, wow, that's a lot of Post-it notes. That's a lot of baggage. It's getting really heavy and full, right? Well, there was one individual who in particular was very heavy in his and heavy in the baggage that he was carrying about all these changes and this conflict. And so I asked him if he would be willing to pick up as many pieces of the baggage as he could. So while he said, sure, so he started, putting stuff on his shoulder and around his neck, and he was rolling, and I think he had 5 or 6 maybe pieces of luggage, and we're all looking at him, and I'm like, okay, so how does it feel to have all that back? He goes, it's cumbersome, it's awkward, and then I asked everybody else, so what does that look like when you see him with all this baggage? It's like, well, he's burdened down, and he's, not very effective because he's so, burdened with all this baggage, and so I said, okay, now I want you to walk with all that baggage because he was just standing there. I said, now I want you to go do your activities. So he's walking around with all this heavy baggage, and I said, now how does it feel to carry all that? What's the experience like for you? So then he started describing how he couldn't get his work done and he couldn't see, other people around him because he's so focused on making sure it doesn't drop off his shoulder or that the bag didn't drop on the floor. And so then we finally said, what would it take for you to let go of all that baggage? And he says, I could just drop it. And I said, okay, well, why don't you just try it? So then he just dropped the handle, and it fell on the floor, and I said, what do you think? And he says, wow, okay, that's one less thing I have to worry about. I said, well, okay, keep walking around. I said, it's your choice. No one else tells you to let go of the baggage. It's really about what you're willing to let go of, and if you're not willing to let go of it, why are you holding on to it? What's so important about that piece of baggage that you still feel you're getting something from? And so eventually by the end of the exercise, he dropped everything. And it was this visual, physical experience of him recognizing, I have got to let go of this stuff because it was keeping him in the destruction, in the drama. And so that's the assignment, folks. I want you to think about those pieces of baggage. If you need to go get your luggage out of the closet, get it out of the closet, put it around your bedroom, around your house, label it, And I want you to look at it, and I want you to decide, why am I holding on to this stuff? And then really identify that and really begin to say, I don't need this luggage anymore. And so that's one of the tips. How do I let go of this old baggage so that I can really start to move on?
It's so visual. I love it. Oh, that is great. That's great. Well, amazingly, we have come to towards the end of our program. Is there a final message that you want to leave with the listeners before we talk about your special offer?
Oh, well, the final message is, you can stop the drama and slow the downward spiral. And it's really about, building confidence and competence. And you do that by learning, by practicing, and by engaging. And certainly these tips are just one resource out of hundreds of resources that are out there that can help you, again, stop the drama and slow the downward spiral.
Oh, that's great. So talk about your special offer, Pattie.
Well, so the special offer is that the book is normally priced $7.95 plus tax for those in Texas, but we're offering it for $5 for those who have listened to the show. I want you to email me at pmporter@conflictconnections.com, or you can also go to our new Facebook page. We have a mini Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Stop the Dreaded Drama, and let me know either through that email or our Facebook page that you listen to this particular episode and that you want to take up the special offer of the pricing of $5 for the mini book, and then we'll ship it out to you. So that would be our special offer. But, yes, we'd love for folks to like us on our new Facebook page, Stop the Dreaded Drama. So we would love that. And engage with us.
That is great. That is so great. Well, let me repeat those. The email address is porter@conflictconnections.com. The Facebook page is facebook.com/Stop the Dreaded Drama. And then, Pattie, you have a webpage as well, www.texasconflictcoach.com. So thank you so much. This was just so much fun.
It is so much fun, and it's so much fun to do it with you, Zena. It's been fabulous, and thank you for agreeing to and offering and suggesting, because I would be the last person to say, oh, let's do it. So thank you so much for offering that as an opportunity for me to be on the other end of the hosting hat.
Yeah, well, it's definitely my suggestion and definitely my pleasure. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Welcome to the Texas Conflict Coach radio program. If you've ever experienced or engaged in destructive or unresolved conflict, then you know it leads to broken relationships, distrust, and damaging results. Our program will help you manage and resolve conflict effectively with strategies, valuable resources, and support. Since 2009, our radio program hosted guest experts from around the globe sharing their perspectives, experiences, and expertise while giving you food for thought. If you can't listen live, then download and listen to any of our 300-plus podcasts in our library at texasconflictcoach.com. So sit back, relax, or join the conversation every Tuesday evening, or tweet us at TXConflictCoach.